Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. And this is season 2, first episode from 2022. And a lot has happened in the MiSTer community in general, a lot of features, and a lot has happened also since you were last here. Not a year ago, but almost a year ago. How have you been, Robert?
It was a very interesting journey this last year. So much has happened to MiSTer, and it was great this last year.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's been a lot in general from MiSTer and a lot from you as well, and a lot of work by Alan as well that you're joining us here today. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
No, on the contrary, thank you. And I'd like to thank Trinix and Sentient 6 for making this possible, and everybody here at the MiSTerFPGA Discord. Thank you for joining us. And Alan, what have you felt from the community and the new features in this year? I know it's way too much to cover. I'm not trying to burden you. I'm just talking about generalities of what you felt this year in general.
The most exciting thing this year has been all the new people joining, and a lot of people who are amazing developers already, or who have other backgrounds but have been trying to come up to speed on MiSTerFPGA development. And for me this year, it's been wild. Jimmy Stones pretty much took over most of the arcade things I was doing, which has been great, and doing other things too. The input tester is really neat and really needed. And so that's what's different this year is there's still a lot of people. I'm trying to, as always, help people come up to speed. If anyone ever wants to send me a note, I'm happy to one-on-one make sure you can code on MiSTer. But it's meant that I think I had a little more time to work on other things, so it's been nice.
That's good, and yes, that's some very important work you've been doing because you've been helping people to get started with this. You have a bunch of information out there for this purpose, right? Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I have a set of tutorials. I did a few videos. I need to make some more videos because my last video kind of ends abruptly because I was completely confused about what was going on, and so I just hit stop. And I should probably fix that. But now I think I understand it. And actually, Jimmy picked up from that video and finished it. So he and I are supposed to get together and actually hopefully make one together. And it's kind of neat because the end of my last video sort of is the beginning of the input tester. So it would be good to sort of do that with him. But yeah, so I hope a lot of people coming online and coding, and it's been fun to watch. So, and I think someone else is making videos now too. They're long. I've only watched a little bit of one, but they seem really good too. So that's exciting. I need to link to those.
Yeah, that'll be useful because it's impressive how much the community has grown and how much work has been put into making this happen. And it's amazing. It's really exciting. Robert, you've also been working on a bunch of things. How do you feel about this last year?
So I must say I missed a lot of things that happened for MiSTerFPGA. So I think Alan has seen much more happening. I was so busy with the projects I've been doing. I didn't look left and right and just work on the things I looked at. It's a bit sad sometimes that I don't get the overview of what happens, and sometimes I ask stupid questions about things that are clear to everyone because I just can't keep up with all the things that are happening. For my project, it was working fine. So if I can concentrate on that, it's working great for me. But it's difficult sometimes if you can't look at everything.
I can imagine, but it's the kind of thing that happens when you're, I'm gonna use a metaphor here, deep diving into some stuff, right? And that's what you've been doing. You've been going very low level and deep diving and then resurfacing again to check what's going on. And I completely understand the feeling. I mean, I've never done work as technical as yours, but it's difficult to keep the holistic or global view of things and then go into very specific views.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult if you look at something, work on, let's say on some component or some feature for 1 month, 2 months, and you don't look at anything else in that time. and everything that happens just goes away, and you don't see it. You miss it completely.
I understand. And how do you manage that? I believe it's going to be interesting for many in the audience because at least for me, that's why I'm trying to empathize and project something that might be wrong, but it's really hard. It's like building a castle in the sky of little details, and when you go to the global view, everything crumbles, and you need a lot of time to get back. Does that happen to you, or can you focus and ignore the rest of the world?
So usually I ignore the rest of what's happening because it's just too much to keep track of all the other things. Typically, I ask some questions afterwards if I missed something or a new features in, and what should I do with that? And it's fine. I can usually keep up with the things, at least what I need, but I cannot keep track of everything that's happening.
I can imagine that it causes a stress if you try to do it, right?
Yes.
Or anxiety, at least.
So yeah. I usually don't even try that because even the way I do it, it already costs a lot of time, and I decided I cannot spend more time on other things that are going on left and right. It wouldn't work out.
Yeah, I can imagine, and it's good that you can focus. And so everybody that's wondering if they could ask questions, you can simply post them in the chat, and we'll take a look at them and go. We are going to, of course, talk over what's happened. I'm glossing over on both Alan and Robert's work previously, because there's a whole episode talking about that, but I'm still going to mention that they've done a lot of things. For example, Alan has worked on the MRA for the arcade, and has worked on MiSTerCade, has worked on the vertical and flip switches for arcade rotation, organizing scripts, improving a lot of stuff in old computers. We're going to talk about that. I'm just giving generalities of what we covered in the last episode, and the high score module, and the core framework for many of those cores. And Robert has worked on Game Boy Advance, has worked on Lynx prior to the episode, Game Boy, and the AO 486, and the improvement of cache and speed up on NAS, on mappers, save states. That's very important in the way that he works, that he described previously, and I'm sure that we'll touch in this episode. And of course, Robert has worked on this year on two important cores, mainly, not exclusively, that we'll cover. That's WonderSwan and PlayStation. And for Alan, we have a lot of ground to cover because he's been working on rounding up cores and improving details. These kind of things are important, as well as his work on creating community and integrating developers into the community. Because it only makes things more precise, and it adds up to this fact that we were talking about with Robert, about having a global vision and having a particular focused vision. How do you feel about that difference, Alan?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Robert that I also get kind of stuck in my own little very narrow thing. I think it's with this FPGA development, it's like that. I think for people who haven't done the development of a core, there's sort of three things to learn. You have to, maybe not three, but you have to learn, enough Verilog and VHDL and kind of electrical engineering-ish stuff to be able to just write any logic and think. For software people, it's hard to think like hardware people and think about the logic. So that's one area. You need to know, I guess, second is sort of about the MiSTer framework, which is usually less important, although I've been trying to document it on the wiki, which has been making it easier for the experienced developers who come on board. But the third part, and I think probably what Robert's talking about, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, is just you pick a core, obviously like PlayStation or the ones I've been working on some classic computers, and it's funny, like I added tape support to the Acorn Electron, and actually David Wood, who hasn't worked on MiSTer, I think he's out working on his garden, he said, but he hasn't worked on MiSTer in a year or so. He had some stuff kind of hanging half done, so I finished the Electron, and I forget, maybe it was Adam or something else he had almost done, but I didn't even know, I added tape to the core, but I didn't even know in the OS how to get, like, load a tape. So, it's really kind of funny. I'm trying to use this computer and I have absolutely no idea. I'm just banging on the keys and Googling how do I use an Acorn. But my point is just like we have to go really deep, and eventually there are a couple of problems I want to fix with some of these BBC. I added the disk support from MIST over to MiSTer for the BBC, but I'd like to add tape, but it's missing a serial chip and this other chip deep in, and I'm going to have to print the schematics out or at least pull them up and start highlighting them and trying to figure it out. And so you end up going really deep, and I'm kind of lazy, so I don't like to go that deep usually. Yeah, on one quick thing, and then I'll hand it back to you, is I'll post in the chat. I have been also trying to work on the documentation, and I compiled a PDF viewer that I found on the internet that's really good and changed it around slightly just to have it work with the joystick, and added some things. There's a build on Unstable, although now it's a little old, I should put a new one up, for viewing PDFs and Markdown and text. And I pasted into the stage chat text a Google Drive where I have PowerPoints and Google Drive documents that make cheat sheets. And my hope is that we'll have one for each of the computers so that when you need to learn how to load a tape or load a disk, it'll be really easy. And you'll just hit, I don't know, F12 and docs and it'll pop up. So,
and that's something that's that will be amazing for helping out people, because just as you mentioned, if you're tackling the problem and you sometimes don't know how these things are supposed to work inside these old systems, because with it's obvious to everyone of us, but with MiSTer you are dealing with the same methods as with the original hardware in general. Of course, there's some simplification or virtualization, right? But you're dealing with the way that you load the things in the original hardware. And sometimes that requires this background and these documentation PDFs that can be presented inside the system is something that will help a lot of people.
Yeah, I hope so. And and it's and so I think that it's been fun watching Robert work on all these cores, and he goes really deep and is amazing at it. And what I've been doing recently is trying to fix like the same problem across everything. So if I learn just enough about like this one video chip that's in the Acorn Atom, the Laser 310, the Alice, and it's in a few more computers too, but I just took all of those and tried to fix it once, and then then I look like I'm making lots of changes because I can take that same chip and upgrade 3 or 4 computers at once, and I was hoping to do the same thing with the tape support. And I started to build like a tape progress dialog because tapes are so slow and annoying, and I wanted to know when they were done. So I started to roll that into different cores. So that's what I've been trying to do, is like find one thing. And that's what I did with the dip switches way back when on Arcade. It's like that was the first thing I did, and I learned how to do dips. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm not very smart, but I can at least add dip switches to the same type of thing to every single core and just get it done.
And that's really valuable because it rounds up the work and improves it to be accurate. And accuracy is something that's pretty important to the MiSTer project. And completeness, right? Accessibility. All those things are really important.
I think this new PDF viewer and the sheets you prepared, it's really helpful for those who start new. Because if you boot up some old computer or even some console, it can be difficult to find out what to do. And it's maybe hard for the user to just check out some websites and learn how this computer worked. It shouldn't be. Usually, if someone wants to use it, maybe you should invest some minutes to learn it, but having something at hand to look at, just with a shortcut, look at that and see the description, how, just for some example, load up a game in a computer core where you don't know how to do it. It really helps getting people there.
It's like being self-integrated, embedded in a way, right?
Yes. And I'm really looking forward when we have this for, at least for the computer course, and I also would prefer to have it also for the console course.
Yes. This is something that Alan just mentioned in the stage chat. It's PDF because they can be viewed on the MiSTer, right? Right while you're using it.
Yeah, so the neat thing, and I have a new MiSTer main. I have a couple of problems, not big problems, but just kind of questions, which is why I put it out for a few people to use, of how exactly should it work. And I don't think we want to get too crazed about viewing too many docs on the MiSTer, but definitely, there are archives full of game manuals, and some of the game manuals are actually important. Some have maps, some have cheats, some have copy protection. The RX, or what's that Japanese computer we did last year that Pierre did, RX78? That's crazy. Like, every game has crazy input, like mappings. There's just no way to use it without looking at it. And so those are PDFs, and we can just drop them right in the games folder. And so the way it will work is you'll hit F12, and where it says about, right above about, I put help, and then it just shows PDF, extensions, PDF, Markdown, or text. And then you can just pick it with your joystick, and then the PDF viewer works with the joystick, up, down, left, right. Works with the keyboard too. There's a lot more commands. And it actually has a table of contents viewer, which is nice, which is hooked to tab, which is one of the 4 buttons on the joystick. And so you can actually hit the table of contents, use the joystick to go through it. It's pretty good. And you can, and what I don't have right now, which people could take a little poll, is it would be nice maybe to have a key where you could, leave up the game manual for, whatever you're playing in the PlayStation, and then be able to maybe hit a key to toggle back and forth without quitting the manual. So we could do that, but the neat thing is it's in the frame buffer and on Linux, and so you're in your computer, you go over, pop up the OSD, go to the PDF viewer, look at what you want to look at, and then when you escape out, you're back, over, and it's kind of, it doesn't stop the core or anything. I don't know. It's nice.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is, and it's I believe it's a quality that will help quality of life in general for the user, and create a more curated experience that's easier to navigate.
Hopefully, we're just trying to make the quality of life a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you for that work. I'm sure that it'll be exactly for X68000. This will be a must-have, right? Because it has so many quirks. Old computers in general, even older than the X68000, have a lot of things that maybe just somebody that used them back then, and maybe even those people, will need to be refreshed on the stuff that they used to do.
Yeah, I wrote an emulator back in the 90s for the Commodore 64, and I still, I'll load it up and I'll forget, how do I get a directory listing of the disk? It's not obvious, and it's, and then you go between cat and dir, and so as Robert said, the idea is hop into an old computer core, especially the computers, and I just want to load a game. I heard this game was great, but how do I load it? And I just want that to be and that's why hopefully the cheat sheets are set up where I have tape and disk on the left and just 3 or 4 commands, so that if you really want to program something for it, you'll go on the internet. But if you just want to hop into try Choplifter on 5 different computers, you can actually do that quickly.
And you already have a lot of them in the folder that you shared. We saw it before. Before we talked here. But people can now access that folder, and they can also collaborate with you. They just need to send you a DM, right? You mentioned.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I know that PDFs are not the easiest thing to create, so I kind of went around in circles and was searching the internet, and I found someone had made a slide template for a very complicated cheat sheet, and so I simplified it, and it looks good on the MiSTer. We made one for Robert. I think he tried it. I think it looks reasonable, and I think it's not great. I mean, I would rather everything be in Markdown, but Markdown is a very strange, hard thing to view on a MiSTer. So the PDF is actually pretty lightweight and pretty good. And I decided we would make them with Google Slides. And I could open up the directory for anyone to edit, but I just thought it was a little nicer if people sent me a note, and then I'll add them to edit. Otherwise, everyone has view access.
Yeah, that's a lot of work that you got there.
But Christoph, who did the amazing PDF manual that maybe some people have seen, I think it might be in French, he has done almost all of them. So he sort of grabbed and took all of his docs and turned them into the same format, which was amazing of him. So he's done almost all the work. And that's the ones that are as PowerPoint are the ones he did, because I don't know, we lost something in translation and they left Google Slides and turned it to PowerPoint. But we can edit PowerPoint on Google Slides, so it's okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that this is something that maybe some people that are not that technically inclined but want to help, this is a very valuable place where help can be and time can be put forward.
Definitely.
And we have a few questions that I want to maybe address right now. Before the structure will be talking about the projects, but we can start with these questions. No more questions at the moment. I'll read them later, or only if they are appropriate for the theme that we have. But there's some stuff that's been asked that I could ask right now. For example, Robert, they ask if you've ever thought about implementing save states on other cores like Genesis, Super Nintendo, or TurboGrafx-16. Of course, the quick answer right here is, I'm talking for Robert, is not right now, right?
Yes, not at the moment. And I looked at some cores before, but it's very difficult to add save states to cores that I don't know how they work. So I don't know how the original system works, I don't know how it's implemented, and it really makes it very difficult. So even for the NES, when I added them, I needed a lot of help from all the NES developers for the different submodules to understand what they do and what needs to be saved, and I couldn't have done it alone. So it's very difficult to add it for a core that I didn't wrote in the first place, or where I didn't know the system.
Yeah, I'd like to add that it's imagine that somebody has a room completely organized to their tastes, and not only that, to a functionality in particular to do certain task, and you are just asked to go inside there and change something very deeply.
Yeah.
It's something stressful. It's something that requires complete attention. That requires that you drop everything else you're doing, probably in your life, not only on the hobby, and pay full attention to this, right?
Yeah, especially you can break the original behavior with that. So it's not just adding another thing that may not work right at the start, but you can break that the original core even works with doing that. So it's really hard to touch these things if you don't know what you're doing. And I usually don't know that if I look at another core. So I don't consider this a task I really want to do on more cores.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine, and I can understand perfectly. And Alan, there's something that that Rantic asked, and he mentions that he'd like to know our technical backgrounds, but mainly any recommendations for people that are brand new to this kind of low-level coding. Are there any courses, books, websites they think that are a good starting point? He says, I can imagine the resources being available today are far more vast and rich than when you all started.
I'll pull up the books in a second. There's the Verilog, the 8-bit workshop Verilog for games book that's, I think, really good, and I think using their website to start is really nice, and just editing their code, because it's basically a simulator online, and that works really well. SpaceX guy Frank Bruno, who kind of came in and out of the MiSTer, unfortunately he disappeared. He wrote a great book. I reviewed it for him, and that's a good, like, a little bit more advanced book where he talks about kind of the gotchas as a more experienced FPGA person. So he feels it's like when he interviews an FPGA developer, it's kind of the questions he would ask and the pitfalls he thinks that most novice developers bump into. So clock domain crossing, and I forget what else is in there, but it was good. Like, it was a hard read because I was so interested in it, but that book is really good. And then there's a couple just regular books on Verilog and VHDL. So I think as far as books go, those are good. And then my tutorials, the other tutorial that was pasted in the chat, are a good way to start. And I think just start and just try something simple. And I think, you basically just want to take a demo and change the color of the background to start with, since we don't really have blinky lights on the MiSTer.
And now that we're on not exactly on the same topic, but Tenshin asks how to use a PDF viewer within the course that he hasn't seen the option.
It's not released yet. You got to download off the
exactly.
Test builds, the new the new MiSTer, which unfortunately is now behind some PSX changes, so I've got to update it again. And then it puts a new menu option in. But I didn't release it because I'm not exactly sure. We're having a little discussion over where do the PDFs live. So that's kind of the next.
Yeah, some details need to be just polished. You can test, as Alan mentioned, right now, but you need to go to a branch, basically.
In Discord, it's on
stuff.
the test build.
Okay, it's under the test builds channel.
Yeah, test build, I think.
Yeah, but it'll be released as soon as they feel it's ready for release, right? We're kind of like making a preview.
If you really want to try it now, it is there. So just throw some PDFs on the thing, hit F9, root and log into your MiSTer, and then type PDF viewer, one word space the name of your PDF, and it'll pop up and you can play with it with the joystick. Because we did install it. If you've run the downloader or update all recently, it is installed
that's awesome.
in Linux in the path. So there's 3. There's Les is already on the MiSTer, which is kind of like more, and there's also this thing called Glow, which is a markdown reader, but it doesn't show images, so it's okay.
Yeah, and they asked Robert regarding what we were just previously talking about, is how is save state even possible in the PlayStation Core?
How is it possible? So it works the same way as in the other cores. This maybe it's a little bit more advanced here because I don't save the whole state in the PlayStation Core, like for example some software emulator would do. So instead I pause the core at a state where many things are defined. So for example the movie decoder is never in the save state because I just don't pause when it is running. So I don't need to save it. And it's the same for other things like the CD drive, because it's communicating with the Linux to exchange data. So I don't take a save state while it's reading data there. So many things can be cut down. So there's even enough space in FPGA with the save states. If I would want to save everything, it wouldn't fit.
That's really clever. Nice. And in a more general sense, I'm going to be speaking for Robert here, is he can do it because he built it from the ground to be able to do it.
Yes.
As he's done in the previous course, because that's the way that he understands and works. I'm going to, it's not my place, but I'm going to say that he usually builds a software emulator that's very precise, cycle accurate. And after understanding and working on that, he builds a core. Could you go a little further into that? We covered that in the last episode. I'm not saying that we shouldn't cover it here, but I believe it's important for people to understand the process.
Yeah, I can say some words about it. So I usually start with a software emulator, and I look at existing emulators to understand how the system works in general, just to get some games starting up. So that's always my first task, getting a game starting up, no matter how the emulator looks at this point. I really don't care. And if the game starts running, I go through the emulator, check that every component is looking as it would look in the FPGA later. So it calculates everything in every clock cycle. For example, the CPU runs every stage as it would on the real hardware, while usual software emulators don't do that. And everything should look the same. And it should still run the game that was running before. So I can work my way from there on. And when I have that, I implement save states in the emulator and use that in the core later on just to debug. So every time I come to a problem in the core, I can take a save state, load it in the emulator, or I can take a save state in the emulator, load it in the core, and go to a specific situation where I wouldn't be able to go without that. And that's what really helps me at this point. So that's also the reason I have the save states in all my cores I've made, because it would be very hard for me to debug all these things without them.
Yeah, I can imagine. And now we haven't officially started talking about the PlayStation Core. We're in the introduction and responding some of the questions, but there's a question that could be more general by Tangent, asking about is there a communication with emulation developers if bugs are found and the like? And it's a tough question to ask because getting in touch with everybody that's involved it's really hard. The real way I imagine this works in general, not just talking about PlayStation, is that thing is put out in the open, right? What can you tell us about this, Robert?
So there's a lot of communication with software emulator developers. So I had a lot of discussions with the GBA core, with Ndrift, the developer of MGBA, and also others from the community. And they are talking all the time about new things they found out, and I can use that information. It's really helpful. I can ask questions about things they have found out years before, because I am new to all these cores. So when I started with GBA, I didn't know anything about it. So I asked some stupid questions there. And they're always helpful and brought me up to speed there, and it was great. And the same has happened with WonderSwan, where I worked with Nia together, and we fixed some bugs together. It was so great to work with such an experienced developer. And now with the PlayStation, it's the same. There are developers from open source emulators. They talk about it, and if I ask some questions, they link positions in the code, how it works there, and it's good. It would be really great if I could provide something more back than I do currently. So when I find something out, I will tell them, but it's nothing compared to what they found out in all these years already. So, but we definitely profit from that.
Yeah, I can imagine, and it's just for general public. I'm just being layman here. Of course, emulation has been around for tens of years, right? And strides were made at first. Precision not being the main target, but precision has been improved as time has advanced. And communication with emulator authors sometimes is probably not possible when you're talking to somebody that wrote their emulator 20 years ago, right?
Yes, but it's much easier if you talk to someone who's still working on the emulator. But
exactly,
I would say for every popular system, at least, there's some developers still around. I didn't find anyone for the Lynx to talk about things, but for every other system I worked on.
Yeah, it's because it's hard to just get the word out that I'm working on this. Where's everybody that's working on this, right? It's like speaking to the abyss sometimes, and sometimes it's so direct because it reaches the right people. But it's dependent on that. If those people are willing to listen, or if they have an open channel, or if they are easily able, if you're easily able to contact them, right?
Yeah, it's much easier in the last years because there's a public Discord server for emulator development, and many of the developers from all these systems gather there, and it's really That's great awesome. to have such a community there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how receptive are they to fixing this kind of stuff? I mean, in general, because it's something that you don't. It's exciting to find something that's you missed, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I have to deep dive into this, right? I can understand this phases of oh no, and then oh hey, how did this even work before?
So that is something that works really great there, because if a developer posts a bug fix for something, so maybe all other developers for the system have the same bug, but someone tells, I found this out, and you need to fix that point, and it will work for you. That's the best you can get.
Wow.
So everyone is usually very happy if someone finds a solution for a bug that's in all emulators or in most, and it really helps.
Yeah, that's surgical and like a godsend fix.
Yes, or even if you go through, let's say, I sometimes go through the GitHub issues from some emulator to look if they have the same problem or something. And if I can find the solution for that, I will post it there, of course. So to have to give them a hint how to make this work. And usually they are very happy to get that. And I am also very happy. I also have had that. I had some open bug issues, and some software emulator developer came around and posted, here, you need to change this and that, and then it will work. And that's great. I'm always happy to see that.
Collaboration in open source projects, and even when they're not open source, I mean in open community, is impressive. Because it doesn't need to be open source for people to contribute back and forth.
Well, I would say it usually is. I didn't had any communication yet with someone working on a closed source emulator or solution. At least not to a point where it would really help.
I see. That's unfortunate. But Alan, they're asking if most devs kind of have a brand or focus, but you seem to contribute in very broad sets of ways. Is there any common factor to your contributions? Are they born from your own interests, or are desired to fill needs as you see them?
That's a good question. I don't know how to answer that exactly. There are definitely, when I started on MiSTer, I had a list of things I wanted to do, and all but one, I noticed this year I checked off. The one thing that I haven't is getting the Apple IIe to save or write to disk. Which we should be able to get. Red Skull has a fix or almost a fix, but he got busy over Christmas. And Gary Becker, who wrote the amazing Coco 3 core for all the other boards, gave me his Apple II, which has disk save, and he says it's easy. So we should get to work. And actually, there's some cool other parts in his Apple II that I need to copy over, like the serial card. I guess I like hoarding things. I guess I started with what was easiest first, and being a hoarder, I kind of wanted a digital hoarder. I wanted to get every core ported over to MiSTer. So if I saw a piece of code on GitHub, and sometimes when I'm bored, I'll just search GitHub for code, and I would port it over. So that's like probably the first thing, which is why it looks like I'm so broad, but it's really, I learned how to take a MIST core and port it early. So so I'm pretty good at that. And then there are a couple cores like Pierre, just who's a machine, as we all know, as well, like Robert, like, holy cow, does he just decide, I want to implement this computer, and 3 days later he's got graphics up.
Wow.
Did Alice, and on his way to Alice, which I guess was a very famous French computer, someone posted a great video in this community about the Alice. He started, I guess, did like the Coco 2, like a real early version. So Dave Shadoff and I took that and fixed it and got it working, because I always used that computer as a kid, like in camp and things, and was interested in it. And it was a hole, because going back to this closed source problem, Roger Taylor's works amazingly, but it's closed source. So that's bad. So and I couldn't get Becker's core working until Stan, who's new to the community, started to help, and he immediately got it working, which was amazing. The Coco 3. So I guess long-winded answer to say, there are a few things I feel like we just need on MiSTer, and then there are a few things that are easy. I find them on GitHub, and I think, okay, well, in a day or two, I could get a whole new game system up and running, or some new computer. So I'll work on that. And then now I like to do this like quality of life things, like the PDF viewer and cassettes. And if I learn a lot about cassettes, then it's like, okay, well, we should put a status bar on all the cassette loading. So I've been building a cassette loading status bar. Well, now it's just kind of copy and paste it. And the same with the high scores. Like for a long time, I wanted to build the high score state machine, and I had figured out how to do it in my head. I finally coded it, and then Jimmy took it over, and then he did all the hard work to really push it into all the cores. But once we sort of had it working in one or two, then it was still hard to get working in the other ones, but it was sort of like a known thing.
Yeah, you're not working from zero. You have an idea of where to go. Maybe you have to modify things, but you have a good idea.
Definitely.
And now that you mentioned the Coco, some people don't know what this is, and it'll be worth it, I believe, to mention what these old platforms and what they meant in general for a generation, right? Because these computers that you've been working on improving this year, they have the common value of being formative for the current generation of game developers. Would you agree with that, or what? How do you describe them and what they are?
Yeah, so I see Sentient saying that she wants the Coleco Atom, and I've wanted the Apple II GS. That's on my bucket list. And I actually tried to get Robert to do it instead of PlayStation. Everyone's going to boo me. I didn't know he was going to do PlayStation and do it so quickly and so well. Or I never would have distracted him. But yeah, so for me, growing up in Connecticut in the US, the big computers were the Atari 8-bits growing up at the toy store. The Commodore 64 was around. I had an Apple IIe and a 2GS later, and the Apple IIs were in most of the schools. And a lot of people had some TI-99s, some Colecos, and the Radio Shack was in every mall. And a lot of people, and for whatever reason, like summer camp and my first coding camp I had at a college when I was 10, like they were all using either TRS-80 Model 1, maybe Model 2 and 3s were around a bit, and the Color Computer. And the Color Computer 2 was really big. And eventually the Color Computer 3 is kind of like an Apple II GS, kind of just a strange computer that I don't quite understand. And that's what Dave pointed out. We should do the Coco 2, because that's like the computer everyone had. And Coco 3 is in a weird, like a I don't know, it's a very odd computer. But so it was neat. So the original TRS-80 came from MiST, from the HTZ, some like Eastern European copy of it, and then I ported it over, and then Dave helped with fix the tape, and then Steadyman, who's not around much anymore, did an amazing job with the disc, and so we got the TRS-81 is in pretty good shape, and then Coco 2, as I said, Pierre started from scratch on that, and then David helped me with that, and we've got tape loading on it, and then Stan came, and he's a professional, his career was retired FPGA developer, and he's done an amazing job, so he helped port the disc, which is used in a couple other cores. There's a Western Digital disc controller that I don't even know which cores it's in, but it's in a bunch. It's in the BBC as well. So he was able to get that slightly adapted and working in the Coco 3, and I, again, trying to do easy things, grabbed it, changed it, didn't quite get it working. He spent like 2 minutes and got it working on the Coco 2. So now the Coco 2, which is a Tandy color computer, it has the tape working, it has the ADC tape working, it's got disk support, and then somewhere in there I saw that the Dragon, which is the British version of it, for whatever reason they just like reversed the keyboard cable or something really silly. So we got the Dragon 32 working with different ROMs and different keyboard cable, and then there was a Dragon 64, and someone on Dragon Coco or Dragon Discord finally showed me what I was doing wrong. So we have the Dragon 64 booting, and the next thing to do will be to get the Dragon to, and that core is a little goofy. Like if someone wants to work on it, there's something wrong with the timing. Sometimes it doesn't reboot, but is to get a new, better controller. Someone hacked on the internet. I saw this hack where they had a special ROM to be able to take a Tandy cartridge disc controller and use it on a Dragon. So I put that ROM on our Tandy disc controller, and it kind of works, but it's kind of terrible. So we need a disc controller. Those are close. They're getting much, much better. That's good.
And now related to this, somebody asks a while ago if hardware donations would help.
Hardware donations. I would help someone. I'm too lazy to get my logic analyzer out and look at it. And a lot of these computers have a lot of manuals and books and schematics, and it may be wrong or not, but there's a lot of information. It's actually really refreshing going from an arcade to a computer. There's a lot of stuff.
The complete opposite, right?
Yeah, it's really nice. Stan is Master S on Discord. Stan.
Yeah, and
Stan Hodges.
This is because back in the day when you got a computer, you were supposed to service it and program it yourself.
Especially Radio Shack, because they had all those parts and things they sold.
Yeah. You could repair it with what they sold at the store.
In theory, yeah.
Yeah, in theory. And I believe we can start talking about WonderSwan, Robert, which probably is not what people expect at the moment, but we left it. Why WonderSwan, and what happened with that?
So I needed a new project last year after I completed the Atari Lynx, and I looked around what other Hunter cores are still open to do, and also some other things. But when I looked around, I've seen the Heigen emulator, which is probably known for most of us here for the Super NES version of it, which is very accurate and it's really good. And it also has a WonderSwan version in it, and it's not exactly as good as the Super NES, but still very good, and it's psycho accurate. So it could be used really easy to create something from it, which would work in the FPGA also as accurate as that, and that made it really easy to create this core. And I thought it's a handheld. It's still missing. It has like 300 games on it. Mostly are Japanese, but it's still a nice system, and why not do that?
And it's a hard system. You have a couple of challenges there. One of them is refresh rate, which is related to something that Alan has been working on as well. But you also have the controller and the rotation, right?
Yeah, from the core perspective, both is not really a big issue, because in the core you just have the buttons and the names, and the user has the problem to map it. But the core has no problem with that, and it's the same for the update rate, the 75 Hertz. You can give it out, and if the user has a screen that can display it will work. The core has some options to get the games also running with a 60 Hertz screen, so that's maybe a little bit of added functionality, but from important parts inside the core, which are crucial to getting the games running and everything working, it doesn't really matter if the core is running at 60 or 75 Hertz or what buttons it has. So this was not the issue at this point. The bigger problem was the documentation for the WonderSwan. So everything that was not already known in Heigen was very difficult to find out. And I wrote some test ROMs for it to get the information out from my WonderSwan I bought, and it was working in the end, and it was great to find out some new things that haven't been known before. So things that have not been in any emulator before, and it fixed some games which are now playable also in Heigen now.
No, that's awesome.
Was the experience.
The specifics we're talking about how the round trip of information goes the whole way. And regarding what I probably was focusing on when I asked you about the difficulty was around user experience. And does the audio pitch change when you work at 60 or adapt it at 60, for instance?
The audio has not changed. It's the data is in a frame buffer anyway to give it out, and it's just updated less frequent from the frame buffer to HDMI, for example.
That's really interesting. So you are basically kind of dropping frames.
Yes, you're dropping frames. You may get tearing with it, or you are getting delay if you don't want the tearing, and it's difficult if your screen cannot manage the 75 Hertz. So it's better if you can do that, but it still works without. But if you switch between both, you notice it directly.
Yeah, I understand, and well, it certainly cleaned it out for me about how that worked, and now it makes a lot more sense, and that's because it's faster, not slower. Interesting. Yep. Interesting. Thank you for that. And WonderSwan is a platform that didn't get as much attention as the one you're working on right now, and we'll get back to that. People are asking about the BGM core, Alan, in the chat. And BGM is a format that abstracts audio and synchronizes it to 44 hertz, kind of like a CD-ROM, and that's not hardware anymore. That's why you won't see a core for that. You'd need to run the specific audio files from each core if supported. It's not a general hardware abstraction. And so, Alan, talking about that we were talking about refresh, and you worked a bit on the Sharp MZ and also on PC88. I'm a big fan of the PC88. What can you tell us about those?
I don't know much about it. Worked did all the hard work on the PC88, and I mean, obviously I shouldn't say he did all the hard work. It was written by someone else. I'm terrible with names. Japanese developer who did 95% of the work, and then Work cleaned it up and got it.
Pusan,
yeah, thank you. And then Work did most of the work, and then I just went in and got stuck with a video issue of trying to get it centered, and then I noticed that it had, for whatever reason, kind of like the 68000 when it started, the scaler was just bizarre and was like doing every other line was black. So we figured out how to center it, and then we doubled the pixels and started to look really nice. So that was me touching and just helping. I wouldn't say I did much work on it. And then the Sharp MZ as well was just this thing that was really messed up. The author, I'd say, did an amazing job with it, and he's really great, but it got too complicated for its own worth, where he replaced most of the MiSTer framework with other framework in the binary and in the MiSTer side, and then he had it working at like every possible display rate, but in doing that, the timing was really broken. It may have taken almost as long as the 46 core to compile for a core that's a trivial computer. And so I just got rid of features and simplified it, and then I fixed like 2 bugs where the MiSTer binary file code had moved forward and where it looked for paths and how it worked. And his code, because he had copied everything, didn't. So I just changed like the bare minimum and then cut out a bunch of code on the core side, got it to compile quickly and pass timing or get timing close. And then it started working again. And I said, okay, done. I'm not going to touch it. Because I was thinking about just redoing it completely. But I was like, it works. People can use it. I'm going to stop now. And he said he wanted to rewrite it from scratch, the author. So we'll see what he does. I didn't want
and these cores have a... sorry, Alan.
Oh, no, I just said I didn't want to step on his toes.
Yeah, these computers that are more obscure present their own challenges because refresh rates, because special keys in the keyboard, obscure commands that are even worse than C64 where you can find it easily, right?
Yeah,
thankfully,
Sharp computer. I don't know. I mean, the PC88 when Work showed it to me and I started using it, I was blown away. Like I was like, wow, these games are fun.
And they're easy to run. They put like game consoles, right? But
I don't know. I only played a few games on it, but I was like, well, okay, this is worth doing. That Sharp one, I mean, I love all old computers, but that Sharp one, for the hassle that core is and how complicated it got, I didn't think was that fun. And the Color Genie is kind of like that. There's a Color Genie out there that I can't get the tapes to load. I downloaded all these emulators, looked for open source emulators, played with MAME. And MAME, I think I got working, but the other ones, I was just hit or miss getting the tapes loading. And it kind of is like a clone-ish of the TRS-80 Model 1, which, as much as I remember and love that, is not, again, that fun to play games on. So, I don't know. At some point, like, the reward, and then you have something like the RX-78, which, again, is kind of a weird one to work on too much because there's just not that much software for it yet. We've been trying to buy stuff on, auctions in Japan and dump it. But at least that's like a wacky, wild computer. The games aren't very good, I guess, either. But they look nice-ish. So, yeah.
Yeah, they are interesting platforms that we completely missed.
Or are so hard to get the hardware like the RX-78 that is super worth preserving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that influenced so much stuff in the other side of the world that we can't tell, right? And that's worth, as somebody that studies how these things evolved, that's really interesting to get in a single package as MiSTer.
And the 68,000, as you know, like what an amazing computer, which I didn't know of until, it started to come over with, it's unbelievable, right? And the ports and the games. And
Yeah, I love that computer. I have one, and I don't want to go deep into it, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge because it runs at 55 hertz, and that gets us the opposite problem that Robert had with the WonderSwan. For people to be able to run it, it has to be slowed down.
To 50 instead of 60?
55. Well, from 55 to 60. Sorry, it had to be sped up.
Right.
I got it mixed up. If you want to, or you have to do some kind of magic, but currently the current core changes the pitch when that happens for audio, because everything is running on sync, right? The same processor is running the audio.
Interesting.
And getting the people to run it at the original frame rate, and getting the I've been working with a software developer emulator. It's FlowSource emulator for years now, because he was the only one that cared about preserving the original floppy disks in the original format, because everything that's out there is cracked or patched to run on without protection. And floppy disks present this challenge that they have. They are analog media, and sometimes protection is reading from those analog sectors and check if they are random, basically, if they are random noise. And if they are stable bits, then it's a copy. If they are unstable bits, then it's an original, unformatted tracks. And well, I'm not going to go down there, but many x68,000 games have that kind of protection. And now I'd like to talk about what do you think about talking about a bit about PlayStation, Robert?
Yeah, so there are probably a lot of questions already in the channel about it, or should I just start with channel?
I think you can. I think you can start with general. We talked about the questions that were already in the channel, and we have a few that are obviously in the mind of a lot of people, like CRT. Somebody asked us about CRT support, which is not a priority, but you're going to reply to that. And we also have an obvious question about dual RAM.
Yes.
And yeah, please.
So just in general, to start with the project, I want to mention that we all know that there has been a core from Lexa working on the PlayStation, and when I started working on the project, I didn't think this core would come up again. So I started in June last year, and it was very quiet at this point. I got a lot of requests from people talking about, can't you continue on this core or work on the PlayStation and things like that. And when I did the Lynx and the WonderSwan before, both systems are not that popular, let's say. They don't have many good games in it compared to, let's say, for example, the GBA before. We could discuss it, but I think there are more games, and usually the system was more successful. And I wanted to work on something that is more popular. So with games I know I would like them. I would like to play them, because that was quite difficult for Lynx. I guess I had never played many games on the system, and for WonderSwan maybe 2 or 3. So I wanted to do something in this direction, and most other systems would have been too powerful for the MiSTer. So I worked on a Nintendo DS 1 year earlier and had to give it up, and Nintendo 64 would also not make it on the MiSTer. So PlayStation was the choice to do there. And with the specification, I thought it should fit, and I should start that project. So I started in June and worked for 2 to 3 months on the software emulator before I made it public that I'm working on it, because I didn't told anything before the first games were running, because I didn't know how long it would take to be sure I could even make it work. And so I started in September then with the core, and everything since then has been open source. So to the two questions, CRT will of course be supported, and it's currently. I use a hack for the video out, because the video out of the PlayStation is asynchronous to the CPU, and it's very difficult to create a core or an emulator before, or anything that runs these things reproducible. Everything same every time you run it again. So I made a hack with the current video out and made it run synchronous to the CPU. So I can trust that it will work always the same. I guess almost all games would work with that and will not crash or hang or really depend on the slightly different timing. But it enables me to get the games running, to get to debug these things. And I will change it to the asynchronous way when the next feature, the CD audio, is done, and after that has been made, CRT output will work as it should work.
Yeah.
So that's for the CRT, and for the dual RAM, that's the typical question all the time. So the dual RAM, I used it mainly as a development tool. So it was used for the first CD loading. It could only load very small disks, but I used that to get the CD loading working. And when I was sure it was working, it was the right time to put it on the Linux side to transfer the data, because it's very hard to develop both systems at the same time. I wanted to have one side completely done, and then I got very big luck, and Alexei did the Linux side for this, and also a lot of other work on the Linux for the PlayStation Core, and I really have to thank him, because I wouldn't be at this point now if he didn't step in and made this work, because I'm really not experienced with programming on this side. So when the CD was transferred over to the Linux side, so the second SD-ROM wasn't required anymore, and later on I added the sound and it was required again, and now we have a special cache mode for the sound, and it works with the DDR3, and the second stick isn't required anymore. You can still use it, and it will be slightly more accurate in edge cases, but I doubt that anyone will notice it at all. It's usually 1 or 2 audio frames, which is like not even a millisecond where the audio will be delayed. But
only tools would be able to detect it if they can trigger it.
I also needed tools. I added a debug output in the core, which worked like a frame counter, and it counted up from BIOS into the games how many frames have been delayed. And I played for half an hour, and it was 18 audio frames being delayed. So you can really ignore that.
Yeah.
And that's
just so people understand what this audio frame is. How long is it?
So one audio frame is 1 second divided by 44,100. So it's I think it's 20 microseconds.
Yeah, it's basically a sample, right? You were 18 samples behind after half an hour.
You're not even behind, because it will catch up. It's just that one sample was delayed at least one clock cycle. It's not even said delayed much more. Maybe only one clock cycle. So it's really not a problem.
Yeah, it's really minuscule. People are asking if MD4A would detect it. I don't think it would. And there was some work on MD4A for the PlayStation, but not by myself, by a friend. And I don't know the current state. We'd have to wait on that. As a matter of fact, I wanted to ask about that and the audio synthesizer on the PlayStation later on. But meanwhile, they're asking if there'll be 2x resolution in the PSX core and if it would be supported on a CRT and a BGA CRT.
So different solution for what? Sorry, I don't.
They're asking basically if the standard functions from the framework would work with line doubling and that kind of thing. And my reply would be yes. When the CRT support is done, the framework takes care of that, right?
Yes. So everything should work as it is usually working. We still got a problem with the scan doubler, which has a problem with all the different resolutions the PlayStation can give out. So the standard scan doubler we have doesn't work with that because the pixel clock is changing all the time and resolutions are switching, and it's not made for that. And if you really need that, we need a new solution for that, but everything else should work. It's still not clear if we have two versions in the end, one for CRT and one for the dual SDRAM usage, because there are some ideas that may require a second SDRAM later on. But it's very unclear at the current point because the core is getting really full in the FPGA. There's not much space left, so I'm not sure if there is even space to add such features. I cannot say for now.
Yeah.
I have many...
And it's the least, the thing that you'd least need to make compromises on, public compromises. I'm asking the question, yes, from the public, but they are not meant to put pressure on you or to define specifics about what people should do in order to take decisions. Because I understand that you're under pressure that some people want dual core because of this, and that's not the idea. It's completely up to them, and this is a core being in development, and main target is single RAM, right?
Yes, for me it's 100% important that it works for everyone who has a MiSTer with at least one SDRAM. So that must work. So everything beyond that is purely optional, and maybe you get some slight improvements on some part, but nothing that would touch the main functionality.
And now, speaking about how the development has worked, what have you found about the PlayStation audio system that has surprised you? How does it work? Does it have some people mentioned that it has synthesis, some that it's just samples. What is it? How does it work?
So there are three parts that could create audio in the PlayStation. The first is the easiest, which is still missing, is the CD audio, which is just playing back the music like a CD player. And the second one is from the same source. It also comes from CD, but is encoded data, which is with reduced data rate. So you can fit, let's say, 4 or 8 times the amount of tracks on the same space on the disk. And this is all sample data, and it cannot be manipulated in any way. It just plays back. And then
it's like an MP3 that you can't modify, right?
Yes, like that. You can adjust the volume and shift it to left or right and these things, but you cannot play it faster or slower or modify it.
You cannot modify pitch, right?
Yeah, because you cannot speed up the CD in different ways. Maybe you could play it at half speed and such things, but I don't think it was really used to do that. But we also have internal the sound processing unit, which is also sampled music with 24 channels, which plays back the samples, which are also encoded like the encoded samples from the CD, and they come from the SPU RAM, which is 512 kilobytes of RAM connected to the CPU, and CPU can write the samples there from the RAM or from CD, write it to the SPU RAM, and the SPU can play these samples back. There are several possibilities to modify these samples. So, in fact, it has so many options to do things with them. So play them faster or slower or anything with envelope, or even creating some triangle function out of samples which are in this RAM. So it has many options there. So
basically like a Super Nintendo in steroids in that sense.
That's a problem. I often hear that, but I don't know how the Super Nintendo does it. So I cannot say that. But it wouldn't be fair to say it's only sampled music. So you can do more, but it doesn't have typical square wave or triangle wave or such channels like the older consoles. But it can do pretty much everything with the samples which are coming from the RAM.
Well, interesting. And this was the first part that was implemented, right?
Yes, and that's also the reason why there's a second RAM used for that in the original design and also in the PlayStation itself, because 24 channels reading data from that, it takes quite some bandwidth to do that. And it's also with 24 channels, you're jumping around the memory all the time, and it reads at different addresses. So it's taking up the whole time in the PlayStation. So it requires a complete SD-RAM in the PlayStation to do that. And the best would be, of course, to do that also in a MiSTer. But fortunately, the DDR3 RAM is fast enough to, with some tricks, we can simulate that behavior quite well. So we read faster, we read with the cache, and so we cover that edge cases also there.
And did you find many games that used exclusively this kind of video?
It's really mixed. So I was surprised that some of the Square RPGs use that even for the movies they have stored on the disk. So usually when some full motion video is playing, the video part and the audio part, which is then used as decoded audio, not the CD audio, is mixed in the same block. So you have 7 of 8.
It's interleaved with the video.
Sorry?
Interleaved with the video?
It's
some samples? Or?
So 7 of 8 parts of the data is for the video, and 1 of 8 parts is for the audio, and they are mixed together and played back. And usually that's the way these videos are done. But it seems that if you want to do really high quality video, you can't spend, or you may want to spend the whole data rate on the video itself. So they store the samples in the SPU and play them back. It's quite complicated. They run some interrupts, and it costs some issues to have that running. But it improves the video quality slightly to have that played back from the SPU instead. So
interesting. Do you remember any game that did that?
Yeah, for example, the Final Fantasy titles do that.
Okay. That's really interesting to see how that changed from the previous generations and the possibilities that having more RAM and more power gave.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that such details and how they implemented that. And for other things, I still don't know how they are done. So there are, for example, some games. I think it's called Unjamalami, where you have to play the buttons in the correct order to the music, and this music is played from CD, but at some point it gets slowed down, and I don't see how that is even possible. I need to learn that.
It's interesting that you've been working on that and that the product of your work does something that you understand how it works. It's impressive how that thing can happen, right?
Yeah, so in this case of this game, it's not working yet. So it's
not working. Okay.
Find out, but for some other things, sometimes it's surprising what works, and you implement the things, and at some point something works, and you don't even know how they do it in the background. But with such a modern system, there are so many things going on in parallel, and with a high speed, it's very hard to track this all. So usually only if you debug something because it doesn't work, you realize how they are really doing it in the background.
It's really, really interesting. Alan, do you have any questions regarding this or the PlayStation in general?
No, I'm just fascinated by it. I think it's amazing. What I'm curious, and I don't know if anyone else is curious, but how big a cache did you need to make for the audio RAM, and remind us how big it was originally on the PlayStation?
So on the PlayStation, the complete audio RAM is 512 kilobyte. So it's not that big, but it's just big enough that it cannot fit into the FPGA. And I use a cache of 64 kilobyte for it. So it's quite large.
Big. Yeah, pretty big then. Interesting. And where is your RAM usage on the MiSTer? So the MiSTer has what, about 530 or something? Is that right?
Yeah, I think we have nearly 500 left after the framework, and it was, I think, below 20% used before the SPU was added, because the PlayStation doesn't have any small RAMs which could fit well into the FPGA anyway, so it wasn't much used. It was mainly used for some small caches like the CPU cache, which is it's quite funny, the CPU cache, and if you compare that with the SPU cache now, the SPU cache is 8 times as big. So it's really a large amount of memory only spent to support a single SD-RAM, I have to say at this point. But we have the RAM there, and I think we can spend it. I could have tried to get it smaller, but I don't see a reason currently, because we still have like 300 kilobyte left.
So the DD-RAM is used for the audio, and then the CD data comes in through the DD-RAM, or does the CD data come in through the I/O control stuff?
The CD data comes directly from the Linux. It's not shared through memory. But the DDR3 is used for even more things. So it's also used for the video RAM. And it's used for the memory cards also. So it's shared. The SD-RAM on the PlayStation is 32-bit wide and 33 megahertz in speed. And on the MiSTer we have 16-bit wide RAM, so we need the double speed. So it would need to read the data at 66 megahertz already. I use a higher clock, so I can also hide the refresh in that time. And also there's some other fast page mode used in the PlayStation for DMA, which also would need some faster response. So I cover it with that, and it's fully used. If a DMA is going on from the SD-RAM to, let's say, the GPU, it's the bandwidth is used. We cannot put anything else in there.
And okay, and that copies it. The DMA copies it from the SD-RAM currently the way it's designed to the DDR then, when it does a DMA transfer? Or does it copy it on chip?
It can copy to DDR3, or it can copy to a texture cache in the GPU, or
Oh, okay. Okay, and so the
some
GPU
other.
also has some DRAM on the chip on the FPGA.
Yes, a little bit of RAM
Little.
compared to today's RAM size. It's really small. But
That's interesting.
That's that's really a lot of work, and it's impressive. I've worked a bit on the Sega CD and the Super Nintendo, and they are both 64Ks of RAM for audio. And on the Super Nintendo, it's intended for code that runs the audio and plays back the music and the samples. Sega CD is just samples. So having 512 here it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really much. A part of this is shared for the reverb functionality, which is quite special for the PlayStation, I would say. It saves away all the audio which is given out already to the speaker, and plays it back after quite some time. It can be some seconds later to simulate a large room or a big hall, and this played back data is then mixed together with the new generated, and this requires a lot of RAM bandwidth. So it needs to write all these samples back and read them back every time, and it requires so much bandwidth that even the PlayStation designers decided it cannot run at 44 kilohertz, it must run at half the speed.
Okay.
So that's interesting when hearing it. I don't think I would hear the difference.
Is that what ends up getting crashed then? Is that how your cache strategy works?
So the cache strategy actually really works mainly caching all this reverb functionality.
And it seems like that's
for the single channels. So each channel will read the data sequentially. So you play back the samples, maybe at a different speed, but you play 1, 2, 3, 4. And if it starts with the 1, and each sample is only a 16-bit, I can read back from the DDR RAM with a burst like, let's say, 16 or 32 samples already in a very small cache. So I only need this read very rare. So maybe every 20, 40, 60 sound samples is a read required for a single channel. It doesn't require much bandwidth then. And but for the reverb, it has, I think it's 14 writes and 10 reads for every audio sample. And those are random in the memory. So this is where the cache is really used. So if we would get rid of the reverb functionality, we could throw this cache away.
That's so interesting, yeah. So and also because you have 24 channels, that is still a lot of bandwidth to the DDR then. But I guess you're saying you can fill it really quickly. That's interesting.
Yes, but it has some influence on the GPU, because the GPU also needs the DDR3 RAM. So if you run the sound from DDR3, so with single SD RAM, the GPU will be slightly slower than before. So it depends on the situation. The worst I've seen is 10%, but it's usually more like 4 to 5% slower. It isn't really a problem because the GPU is currently faster than the PlayStation's GPU anyway. But you can notice it in some benchmarks. Probably not in games, as they are usually bound by the CPU and not by the GPU. But in some pure GPU benchmarks, you can see the difference.
That's really a lot of juggling you've had to do there. And now that we talked about it a bit, has it been harder to get audio right than the GPU? It's two different things to do. With the GPU, you can always look at the image, and it will not fade away, and you can look at every pixel. And with audio, all you can do is hear. And it's really difficult because I developed everything with my emulator, which runs at very low speed. So maybe a quarter of the full speed. And you can't hear to audio with that. It just doesn't work. You can record the audio for like
20 seconds and give it back in 5 seconds later to have the speed correct, but it doesn't work well. So what I did was I exported the audio samples that the emulator DuckStation generates, and I exported the same samples from my emulator and compared them so they are bit accurate to the ones that DuckStation generates, which doesn't mean that must be the truth. So the best is still to do that also on real hardware later on to verify that. But I cannot give out the samples from real hardware that easy. So to get started, to get the SPU, the sound processing unit running, I choose that way. And later on, every single function of the sound processor can be verified with hardware. Because of this reverb functionality, you can record everything that would leave the SPU to RAM and read it out. So it's really good to even have the possibility to record samples digital and compare them with some test. But it's a lot of work, and I decided to go the way that we have sound now and get it accurate at some edge cases later on.
Of course, and I believe that's really wise because it's already a lot of work and a lot of things to look after. And regarding the GPU side and the CPU side, what have you found there that's been challenging?
So on the CPU side, the most challenging thing to find out is how does it work with all these stages. So it's a 5-stage CPU. So it runs, it first fetches the data, decodes it, calculates with it, executes memory, and writes back the result. So 5 things running in parallel. So it's really difficult to keep that always in mind, what's happening in the front and the end. And if you want to find out how it works, you cannot look at emulators because they don't do it. They just use a single command, maybe some tricks if the pipeline behavior of the CPU is required at some points. They do some tricks to mimic that, but usually you can't take the information from that. You can look at the data sheets, but they don't tell you the truth for everything. So you need to find out, does that happen in stage 3 or 4? And you need to try what's right. And that was really difficult with the CPU.
So when you say try, how did you try it?
For example, what was difficult was the coprocessor interaction. So the PlayStation has a geometry coprocessor, the GTE, which is accessed in either the 3rd or the 4th stage, depending on which command you use. And if you don't do that right, you get some geometry calculations wrong with exploding polygons and things like that. And in this case, it was try and error for most cases. And I still have some games that have this problem, and I'm not sure if it's really related to that or some other bug. But you cannot really find documentation for that because it hasn't been done before, as far as I found.
And were there any open cores or any implementations of the MIPS processor before? Not that you would use it, but was there anything you got to look at?
There are some, but I haven't looked at them because they didn't contain these special functions. And there are also some other modifications to the PlayStation processor. Like the data cache is not used as cache, but as scratchpad RAM and some other changes. So it wouldn't fit to use. So
this was this custom MIPS processor. It was based on a MIPS, but it's not used in a computer.
Yeah, I would say it's 90% standard and the other parts are custom.
But so to actually figure out what stage something happens in, I don't know how you would do that. Would you put a logic analyzer on the real thing and look at the bus, or how would you write a test ROM, or how would you figure out?
So for most of the parts, you can see it relatively easy with test ROMs already, because there are, for example, for this GTE, there's a test ROM that runs several millions of commands there, and gives you a result if you're doing everything correct. So you can just try, is it the third or the fourth stage, and you will see the result instantly. So
it gets easier and easier as you get more of it correct, because then you have less combinations.
Yes, you must have some feeling where it should be. So if you know it's either in the third or in the fourth, then it's easy to find out. If you don't know where it is at all, so for example the interrupt, I'm still not 100% sure if I'm doing the interrupt correct, because it's really difficult to find out where does it trigger, at which time, which delay, and these things. And it will take some time until this behavior is really 100% accurate.
I assume you used your software emulator and that test ROM to move the stages? It'd be way too slow to do it on the FPGA, I would think, to recompile it.
Yes, that's a great way to do that, because I can create a save state before the test, right before, change something, run it. 3 seconds later, I know the result and change it back, and that's something you cannot do on FPGA. So it really helps to have a software solution there at this point to do that.
And did you fix most of those bugs before you did the FPGA at all, or were these bugs that people helped find in the test channel?
So it depends. Some bugs. So the general behavior I wanted to have correct in the emulator before I even start implementing the FPGA core. So I had, for example, this GTE test I had running completely right in the emulator before I even started the FPGA core. And also I wanted to have at least a decent amount of games running before starting that. So I can be sure when I start the FPGA design, I don't have something completely different and must change it later on, and that's way more difficult. So I did most of that before, but I still encountered lots of bugs which are only present in the hardware, because some things you can't do. Things like accessing memory at several points and at the same time, and things you don't always think about it when writing a software emulator, because it's possible there. And if you then look in the hardware, I cannot do that. I need to find another way. And at this point, when this happens, it's likely to introduce new bugs.
Yeah, I was working on the Space Invaders core, and one of the ways I was able to quickly get it working was I found a really simple. I downloaded like 10 Space Invaders emulators, or 20. Found one that was really easy to use, and I got really far figuring out the controls and the inputs and outputs. But as you say, you look at an emulator, and it's just even the simplest, especially something like Space Invaders. They just load everything into RAM, whether it's ROM or this or that, and they just go crazy. And you try to move it to the FPGA, and like a head scratcher in the beginning, especially if you haven't written it yourself.
It's kind of the difference between high-level emulation and low-level emulation in general, right? Because in high-level emulation, you expect the results, and it doesn't matter how it's made. But in FPGA, in your implementation, you care precisely about that.
Yeah, you also have some advantages in the software emulator, which you cannot just port over, which are, for example, things you can just read twice in the memory. It's the same if you read from the memory or from some register where you captured the last read or something like that. You often get lazy with these things. I can just read again. It doesn't cost anything. And if you only want to stay in the software emulator forever, that's perfectly fine. Why not do that? But if you want to go to FPGA with the emulator later on, it's hard. Sometimes if I develop something for the emulator, I think about that would be really easy to do it now this way, but I know it will hurt later on. So should I do it? And it's the fast way to get things running, or should I not do it? And I always have to decide at this point. Is it worth going the hardware already in the emulator? Because I don't get anything for that later on.
Yeah, and speaking about he who is Red asks if you ever thought about optimizing the software emulator for it to be able to run on a PCF, or on a PC for non-MiSTer users?
So I don't think it's really worth it the way I've written it. So for example, the emulator I've written for the GBA works about the same as the core, but and it can run full speed and a very high-end PC. But I don't think that's really something people would want to use later on, because you don't want to use a high-end PC which is running hot just to run a GBA. And there are emulators available which can do it on really low-end hardware and run about the same in quality and with way better features now. And my emulator is in no way very user-friendly. So I often just I don't have menu items to do something. I just change the code and compile anew. It's nothing that could be done by a user, and it would.
And also, given support and releasing takes way too much time, right?
All this UI stuff, and it's just that work. I really don't like to do that. It's no.
I fully understand.
I like to work on the inner things, and that's a great thing with MiSTer. I can do that. So the framework is already there, and it's improved constantly, and I just can take this framework and just work on the inner parts of the core, and that works great together.
Yeah, you immediately get shadow masks, audio filters, and resolution changes.
Yeah, even the simple parts for getting started. So you have a USB controller you can plug into and get the buttons. So when I first did the GBA core, I made it on a different board, and I didn't have the possibility. So I wrote a controller core for my Nintendo 64 controller to even be able to interact with the core. So that's something that's really easy with MiSTer. So that, or loading ROMs into the core, into the SD RAM, and things like that. To even get started, it's much easier than having to do these things on your own.
Yeah, that helps a lot indeed, and it's part of the getting started for introducing new people, right, Alan?
Yeah, definitely. It's quite nice. It also makes it easy to port things to it because we get for free, so many features. It's really nice.
And for the user experience, because they know what to expect everywhere, right?
Well, and as Robert said, we get joystick super easy. I mean, and analog joysticks, although the setup dialog's a little goofy, but we just get the joystick and it just works, and we don't have to worry about the button mapping so much. It's just really easy. Yeah, and keyboard, and a lot of things are just really simple with the framework. And when you look at ports and you look at other frameworks, it's just a little more complicated.
Speaking about that, you worked on the tape and mentioned that, but how is that managed for people that don't know? For instance, many don't understand that audio tapes were used to load the code or the binary into these computers. And how is this? How does the framework help you here? How can a user load an audio tape? And how does it work?
I think the tapes are still magic to me. And my first computer was actually Timex Sinclair, a ZX81, I guess. And I never ever got my tape drive working. I think my dad gave me his old tape recorder. Maybe it was dirty. So I'm not a huge fan of tapes, but and they're slow and horrible. So on the MiSTer, there's two options. There's the ADC input, which is just an analog to digital converter with a little adapter board, which gives you an audio jack. And then the core has to somehow read the tape. The tapes are basically like a modem at different baud rates, but usually around 1200, I think, or so. And so that's pretty, I wouldn't say straightforward. So the core, depending on how the core worked, has to have all the code to read the tape. And then the framework, some of the computers, we load the tape straight into RAM and then drop a jump location somewhere, or tell the processor to jump. That's how because let me back up. When people started writing emulators, they had to convert the tapes from tapes to a file. And as you were saying with the floppy, sometimes the tapes are just wave audio. The Acorn tapes seem to be like that, where they're mostly kind of an audio format-ish. But some of the tapes are missing headers and leaders and all sorts of things, like in the TOSEC archives. But the tapes are generally just data. And then there are a couple of different functions people have written that I've been sort of porting around that make a square wave out of the data and feed it through at the right bit rate. And then hopefully the core just reads it. And so, and then, as I said, some of the emulators would just make a dump format that kind of looked like a tape or wasn't a tape. Like the Laser 310 core has this VZ format from the emulators, and it's basically a header. And it tells you where in memory to put it and where to jump to. So that's really nice because you can just load the tape really quickly, drop it in memory and jump. And so it's not going to take 6 minutes to load the tape. But some, like the TRS-80 Model 1 started that way, where there was a hack and a special ROM, but then David changed it so it would actually load the tape, because sometimes on the tape is a tape loader, and then any tape that is special or has a tape loader won't work if you just kind of try to shove it into RAM. That's probably too much information, but and then the other thing I'll say about this is, if you're going to load it audio, then the tape, let's say, is 12K long or something. Right before I put in the status indicator, it would just start going. Some of the chords you could listen to the sound, but you had no idea where the end was. But we know where the end is, so the status indicator is for me because I'm lazy, and I feel like I don't know. It's that you can't really. Is it actually doing something? Is the question. So, and are we almost done? Are we there yet?
Yeah, it improves the user. Yeah. It improves the user experience to have that, and not just for you. It's in general, of course.
Especially for me, because I'm very impatient. The other thing to do is we can, like on Coco, we do it. Although I think we may have broken something. We could double or triple the speed of the core, like a turbo mode, and then we could load the tape quicker.
That's awesome. Yeah,
and then that's nice too.
And speaking about that framework, and you already mentioned it a bit, Robert. Somebody asked about CHD files and ISO files, and there's also B&Q files. And how does the framework help you, and how do you make that loading work? Because it's a CD-ROM. It's not like a floppy or a cart, right?
Yeah, so for me, this is very comfortable at the moment, because Sogelig is doing all this work in the Linux. So I can just from the core request a sector from the CD, and I will get the data after some time. And everything behind I don't have to care for. So what's happening in the Linux is when the user selects the file, this file is then opened, and when a request comes up, it reads at the position that is requested and returns the data to the core. So it's not really something that is shared among many cores, I would say, especially for the PlayStation, which needs a special sector size read from the CD. It's kind of special. It's a special implementation only for the PlayStation right now. And it will stay that way. And maybe someday some other core can reuse some parts of it. Like we can hopefully reuse some parts of the Mega CD core now for the PlayStation, for CD audio, for example. But it's kind of special. For many things, you can just use the framework, like loading a BIOS. So loading the BIOS in the PlayStation is just like loading the BIOS in the GBA core or the Game Boy or whatever other core. It's just the same, or loading down the ROM to SD-RAM. It's always working the same. But sometimes you have that special functionality where you need a special implementation in the Linux part. And I fear for the PlayStation that is the case for some things. And we also had this with the memory cards recently, which are also now a special implementation in the Linux part, because the handling is difficult from from normal saves, which are used in other cores. And it's great that I get support there, because if I had to do this all on my own, it would be taking way longer.
Of course. And speaking about the BIOS, and how do you support multiple regions? I already know, but many in the public don't know how this is supported in MiSTer in general.
Yeah, this is also a special implementation in a Linux. So if you put your files into a folder, let's say you have a folder NTSC, and you put the BIOS inside this folder, it will get downloaded when you select a CD from this folder. And I think it will also look in one directory above. So you could do something like NTSC and then have a bunch of folders with the games in there, and it will look in one folder above and pick the BIOS from there. And it's really convenient if you have a folder for NTSC and for European games, and they have different BIOSes, and they get downloaded every time you pick another CD. It's really useful.
That's awesome and convenient. Yeah. And they're also asking, what about RetroNAS, and would that complicate things or make it harder? RetroNAS is basically a NAS that's targeted for retro systems, and it would be streaming from the network. Would that be an issue for the PlayStation Core?
Streaming from network is not a problem, but I think that the RetroNAS, isn't that a Raspberry Pi with a...
It can be a Raspberry Pi,
okay,
but it could be anything in reality.
So the problem with data fetching for the PlayStation Core is that with 2 times CD speed, you need to fetch one data sector in 6 milliseconds. So that's the delay you got. If you're reading sequentially for new data, it's usually not that big of an issue, because you can read ahead in the Linux already. But if you want to fetch at a random point new data, it can be difficult to reach this 6 millisecond time, especially if you are reading from a magnetic hard drive. And if it's also connected via USB and also via Ethernet. So for example, if you have a Raspberry Pi with a hard disk connected via USB and have that on the Ethernet, it's not really a fast solution. So I would not choose that compared to, for example, eternal SD card or some gigabit Ethernet connected network device which has faster hard disk directly connected.
Yeah. And as Robert just mentioned, Joe, these are 2x drives on the PlayStation against the PC Engine and Sega CD that you've already tested. Sorry, Robert.
Yeah, so from the things I used here, so I used the SD card and even a very slow old network attached storage with magnetic drives, and it's only 100 megabit connection. Both work fine, but there have been some reports of USB connected drives which have some problems from time to time. So I cannot be sure at this point. I haven't tried all combinations which are possible. I can just say it's not 100% easy to have the transfer speed all the time. So you may need to take some care. But usually, I think for most users until now, I haven't seen any reports that it's a general problem. So maybe some people have some issues with, especially going over Wi-Fi. It may be a problem.
Yeah, of course. And David Shaloff asks something related specific to CD-ROM head-seek delays. He says that he's not sure if reading too quickly can reveal bugs on games, but that this happened and was important on PC Engine. He's worked on that.
Yes, so the PlayStation also has some seek times which are important to some games, and I have seen that already. For example, looking at emulators, you see some, I would say, hacks to get the CD head at the right position and what time it takes. For now, the core doesn't implement that because the model found in the emulator is not working in the FPGA. It's just calculating with some floating point numbers, which wouldn't work nice in the FPGA. So I skipped that for now. If we get to a point where things are stable and this task can be done, I will do it and implement some more accurate model for that. But for now, I think most games don't really care about it.
That's good to know that it's not they are not as sensitive to that parameter.
Yes, and it's also, you can notice that if you use the core currently, there's sometimes a little CD overlay coming up that usually only happens when the seek drives cannot be met, which is often happening if the CD is just doing a small jump from, like, say, it's just jumping one sector backwards or something like that, where the Linux doesn't have any data cached for that. So in this case, you may not meet the seek timing, but I haven't found a game yet which refuses to work on with that. So in a real system, it can also happen that the timing wasn't hit or CD couldn't read a sector the first time. And I would say probably some games would also hang on a real system if that doesn't work every time. But we need to see how good we need to mimic that. And I want to get it better at some point. But for now, there are more important tasks.
Yes, of course. Because, but just as you mentioned, the original console already has to have tolerance, and the games also, right? Because CD-ROM is not the perfect medium, as we all know.
Yeah, you would assume that most games should have tolerances, but I fear that not all have them.
I see. Anyone in particular that you've seen?
Well, I have seen some games which are already very dependent on the read timing. So if one sector is missed, they hang immediately. So I've seen that.
Wow.
Especially when running full motion video. So that's happening.
And one would expect that to be more tolerant, right? Because it's an skippable event and non-interactive. But I understand.
Yeah, with this, I think it's the problem of this first generation CD consoles. They give low-level access to the game developers in a way you do it today anymore. So they have access to the inner parts of the CD and handling everything. Today you would just say, read this file for me, and they start the drive or stop it at a special point to have to be near the sector they want to read and faster access that. They did all kind of optimizations there for faster loading times, and I think it probably made sense with the slow drives they had back in the days to do these optimizations, but it also leads to all kind of problems. Like we have currently with switching CDs for multi-CD games, where you need to switch from first to second CD, and there's no standard to check if a CD was changed. Every game implements something else. Some check for the CD drive being open, some check for the motor being off, and other things, and some wait for some the drive must be open for 1 second, for the next it must be open for 3 seconds. It's really every developer did something else.
Wow, that's a mess, and you just have to compile them and support each scenario, I guess.
So in theory, if you get everything working the same as the real drive did, it should be okay, but it's very hard to find out these details. So it will be a long process to get there, especially with the large library. There are so many games, and if every game is doing something special with the CD drive, it really takes long. And we can see that with the CD drive replacements we have with the cross-section or PSIO, and
they have a lot of issues in many scenarios. Yes,
issues after all those years they exist, and they only rebuild the CD system, not the whole core. So, and they still have issues. So I really fear we also have some long-term problems with some games where we need to find out what's even happening there, and it will take quite a while. I cannot expect that I get these things faster done than all the others that worked before on that.
Yeah, and there's been a bunch of questions from the audience related to the PlayStation. One is that given that many arcade games were based on the PlayStation, do you see any future for that?
It's difficult. I guess you're thinking about the arcade systems that are based on the PlayStation hardware.
Yeah, Zen and CN2, CN1, CN2, all those by Namco and Capcom, and
yeah. So some of them are using a different sound chip, so that would need to be redone, of course. And some use larger memories, which isn't that big of a problem. And the good part is that I think most of them should have removed the CD drive, which is one of the worst parts of this console. So I think it should be possible in terms of space if you remove the CD part, and maybe some don't even use the full motion video and other parts. I think it should fit into the FPGA, but it's still a lot of work to get these things done for only few games. So I'm not sure if I would be motivated to do that, because now I'm working to get thousands of games running, and for some arcade system it's maybe tens.
10, yeah. It's a very, very small amount. Yeah, I fully understand. It's coming from the WonderSwan and running to the PlayStation and seeing the different response, and also all the work that's around it with so much good games, right?
Yeah, and also I also have a problem with the kind of what the arcade games are. So I'm not a big fan of all the shoot 'em ups or fighting games. I never play them, so it's really difficult to fight even arcade games I could be motivated for.
You break my heart, but that's okay. And but don't worry, CN1 and CN2 games are mostly like Strider or Street Fighter. What else? There are many PlayStation games that are ported to those. Back ported from the arcade ports to PlayStation.
Yeah.
But yes, some are fighting, some are just action adventure, hack and slash, that kind of thing. And Tetris. You also have Tetris, the Grandmaster.
Yeah,
some racing, yes.
I'm not sure how good these ports are. If it's probably not a true solution in the end.
Yeah, I understand. I fully understand. And they also ask if there is Rumble support.
So in theory, the core already has Rumble from the controllers. So it's decoded, and we mainly need the Linux part on giving this Rumble back to the real controller. So that must be done, and it's, from what I understand, it's not that easy to do that, and I'm not the right one to handle that. I have no experience with all this controller stuff and the Linux stuff, and would be great if someone would look into that. And I think Solik is going to do that once the core is more major.
I see. And motion adaptive interlacing, they are asking about it, if it could be implemented.
So I didn't look what is really required for that, but
non-priority, I guess, right now.
It's no priority right now. So I still hope we get some de-interlacing solution for the scaler, which would work for every core, and it's not a special solution for the PlayStation. Maybe we get something like this. But
for those interested, this is for 480i content specifically.
Yes, and there are maybe 10 or 20 games which are using that in the game itself. I think the most popular one is probably something like Tekken 3, which uses it in-game, but most games only use it for menus where you don't have moving content, so it doesn't hurt at this point. But some games, it's really not nice to look at them on a modern TV.
Yeah, it's such a hard scenario specifically, and because you're missing half of the information, or there's a lot of stuff going on. They also ask about multi-tap for simultaneous 4-player support and link cable between two MiSTers.
So for the for the multi-tap, we currently have the situation that every controller that is added. So we have currently the digital one, the analog one, the mouse, and gun controllers, and each one of them must be duplicated for every connected controller. So we have 2 possible currently in the core, and 4 controller types. So we need space or logic space in the FPGA for 8 controller types already. If we use the multi-tap and have 4 of them, it doubles again, and it will even be more complicated if we want the memory card support for a 3rd or 4th slot. So it's really taking a lot of space in the FPGA, and I would prefer if we don't give up that space for that feature. And if a user wants to do that, maybe we can do it with a native interface, connecting a real multi-tap with the user I/O, like we have on some other cores, and handle it that way. I think it's the better solution than spending all the resources just for this feature, and I'm not sure how often it would be used in any case. So if a user really wants to use it, I think they can use the native interface with user I/O.
Yeah, because it'll get more complicated because some games are 8 players, like Bomberman. So it would be a twofold problem, right?
Yes, and for the serial connection, that would work in theory, but it would also require the user I/O port to do that, and you need adapters and everything. I didn't look into that yet.
Okay, yeah, because it's direct hardware interaction, right?
Yes. So what currently is done with that is I can use the serial port already to write out debug information, but it's not working in the hardware, of course. So I can do this in my VHDL simulator. When the game is writing something to serial out, I can dump it to a file and look at it. So some games even dumps error messages if they have a problem. They don't just crash; they dump an error message. It's really nice to have that. Not all, but some of it. And this interface works. What needs to be done on a hardware is just serializing the data and giving it out to the pins. I don't think it's a huge task to do it, but you need a connection with a real PlayStation or another MiSTer, and it's quite some hardware effort to do that, and I didn't look into that. And
it's non-priority at the moment.
Yeah, I'm also not that much interested in these things. I also got this request for these things for the GBA core and other cores, and I think all the hardware for that is there. You usually don't only need to serialize the data and implement it. Maybe someone wants to do it at some point, because it's not my main goal for this project.
And I'd like to mention here that keeping a developer interested in the stuff that he wants or feels like doing is important, because it helps a lot in the mental state, because this is very demanding task.
Can I ask a question about the multi-tap?
Yeah, please.
So you said that there are how many types? You have a gun, an analog, and a digital. Did you say there's
and a mouse.
A mouse? And I'm going to ask a really naive question, although I do have a real multi-tap lying around here somewhere. In most cases, do you need a gun on all 4 or 8? Probably not, right?
No.
So maybe
Probably not. Probably
2x.
Yeah, probably it could be reduced on the further slots or something else. There are also ideas to rework this whole system to not duplicate if you have more slots, but have a better solution for that. It saves resources, but it's all work, and I haven't thought about that yet because the current system
very low.
works.
It's very low on the list. I was just curious because it might make sense to just have, maybe just have 2 more controllers. Just pick analog or pick digital, or put out a poll or something, and not.
Yeah, maybe for some games that's already enough. I'm not sure even how many controllers are supported by MiSTer. If you could even do 8.
I don't know about 8.
8.
I think. Oh, look, I'm curious.
Yeah, so far as I know, 8, but it could be more. No idea.
Oh, okay. So maybe at some point, but for now, I think we can live with the 2 controllers for the next month.
Yeah,
sure.
Definitely.
And specifically, since you're working on accuracy, right? Sorry, Alan?
No, I definitely don't. Not important, but there are 6 analog left, 6 analog right, but that's 1 stick. So 6 controllers right now.
Okay, thank you. And Alan, there was a question that says, what do you think of the life cycle of the current MiSTer hardware? I'm just thinking MiSTer reaches ceiling and evolved to MiSTer to be able to support more modern cores. Are we getting to MiSTer ceiling, and what would get next hardware look like? Is this something that is already discussed among the MiSTer developer community?
I'd say not much is going to happen as there's no supply of anything right now.
Of course.
The COVID thing, but yeah, I mean, we think about it. I think that I'll say 2 things about it. Yes, I did buy another board which had like a 7-month lead time and came pretty quickly. But it's just sitting in my box in a box still. I never took it out, but hopefully we don't need 2 SD RAMs, and hopefully we don't need a new MiSTer for a while. And I think Robert should answer this because he's the one who's most likely to write the next core that needs a bigger MiSTer. But from my perspective and what I'm interested in, there's a lot of computers and systems that fit. So I don't feel. I mean, if you had infinite hardware, of course you could do more things or things more easily. But I don't see it as a big issue. And yeah, we'll get there eventually. But maybe when we get out of this shortage, there'll be some new board that's cheap because Alexei's really good at picking the right price performance. Like he has one of everything. Like if there's another board that this could be built on, that would be awesome. I'm sure he'll port it.
I'm gonna add to what you said that this shortage is not just short term. We've slowed down in everything as stabilization in terms of distribution, accessibility, and that also slows down what can be pushed. We've already seen that many things are being shipped with older processors, older FPGAs. Even 68000 and C80 have been having some action for products, right? So, given that, and what Alan also said about a lot of systems and a lot of arcade boards and a lot of accuracy and perfection that can be done, I don't see it as a necessary jump in the short term. But what do you think, Robert?
So I would say the console cores we're nearly done with all the console cores that can be, so the modern ones that can be done on the hardware, I would say. So we will not see Nintendo 64 on the hardware, we will not see the Nintendo DS or even things above that. So like the Dreamcast or something like that. But on the other hand, it's also very difficult to even talk about these cores because they are more and more complex. So if I look back, it took me some months to work on the Lynx or on a WonderSwan. And if I talk now about the PlayStation, which will cover way more than a year for me already. to get it at the state where games are well playable. And then when you go to the next generation, who should do that? We don't have an endless supply of developers with experience to do these systems where you would need teams already to create them. So it's not only that the hardware is at the limit, but also our development capabilities are at the limit. I don't think we probably would need to work together with many people to get something like a Dreamcast or even playing some games. So it's not just the hardware at this point. Mm-hmm. But I think we have a good community here to improve the things we have now and to make these things that can work on a MiSTer work well and even better than they are working today. And we can still improve a lot here. And I don't think we will switch to new hardware anytime soon.
Agreed. Completely agreed. And reverse, I'm already impressed by you being able to work on a PlayStation. I think that there are so many things to be documented and voids to be filled because documentation, I'm sure, has not been perfect. And even for older stuff, Alan can tell us about all the voids that we have, and there's not a single person that understands a complete system, even back then, right? Not fully. And to make this course, that's what has to be done.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
There are a lot of cores that aren't done. I mean, if you think about it, and Robert, just like you can give me a thumbs up, thumbs down whether you think these are possible. I mean, we don't have a Xerox Star, so that's definitely possible. We don't have. We have a Mac Plus, and we have a Mac SE on MiST, almost on Mac on here. We don't have a color Mac. We don't have, for both Amiga and Mac, 68,000 processor that has an MMU or an FPU, which I think is doable. It's a lot of work, but then that would open up a lot of things. We don't have a color Mac. We don't have a PowerPC Mac. Might be at the edge of possible. And those are just like kind of US centric things that I'm used to. What do you think we're missing, Robert? Because I think there's a bunch of obvious things. Next, we don't have a Next. We sort of do, I guess, maybe. In the Spark Station, we're probably missing all of the SGIs. HPs.
So there are
SGI.
Probably way more computer cores missing than console cores for sure.
For consoles, you have Virtual Boy, you have 32X, you have PCFX, you have 3DO, you have Jaguar, you have, of course, all the Japanese computers are basically consoles like the X68000 that's there. You have the PC88.
But even with this course, you already realize, so for example, the 3DO, which is maybe a little bit less complex than the PlayStation, but I'm not sure if that helps much because it's way less documented. No good emulator available to research things. It's
less popular.
Yes, but even with that system, it's hard to find someone who will do that, who will spend, let's say, 1 year, 2 years to work on this, because it's not that popular. But you need a lot of effort to get these newer systems running. So this system would be probably possible in the MiSTer, but who will do that? Who will spend 2 years of their life for such a system? And I think that's even more of a problem if we would go to newer ones, because people would have to be committed for many years to get them working. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think the community would need to grow way more to make that possible.
Also, like the Mac Lisa or Apple Lisa is another one, and I've looked at the emulator a few times, but you run it and there's just not so much software for it. So super important historically, but it is hard to think about. The Laser 500 is on MiST, but I tried to port it quickly, but I can only find like 12 pieces of software for it. So some of these that have no software just seems barely worth working on.
Yeah, I agree. Popularity of the systems doesn't help. CDI, they mentioned, and the quality of the software also doesn't help in general in many systems.
Robert, what's your next? Like, you did that poll and everything. What are some systems that you would want to work on after PlayStation?
So I will for sure not work on any system that is that large. Next.
Something smaller.
Yeah, so I think PlayStation will cover easily the whole year now. So I hope we have some official release in summer with many games working well. But there are so many games and so many things that need to be researched, and I don't think I can just leave the project when, let's say, 90% of the games are running. I cannot run away. So
I can only imagine that you see it as an avalanche just falling towards you.
It was one of the reasons I was struggling with starting this project in the first place, because I looked at the popular emulators that were available and how many games they still cannot run after all these years. So I assumed that are probably also open bugs I will have even after spending 1 or 2 years on this project. And it's really not a nice situation to start a project and it's really difficult to even bring it to an end. And it will take very long. So I will not do that decision in the next 1 or 2 years.
What do you think percentage-wise? Where are you right now with games running?
With games running, I would say maybe, it's hard to say, maybe 60 to 70% are running, but most of them still have some bug somewhere, I would say. Some games can be completed without finding any serious bug. I've completed myself 2 games yet, but I think it's way. It will take way longer until we get an official release that is stable enough to give it to everyone and say you can report every bug you can find, and because currently it would just overflow the issue list on GitHub.
Yeah, I can completely see that. And we also had another question a while ago by Lemonici that says, it's a bit more general question. If the Raspberry Pis are seen some of use as a peripherals to offload some of the processing, like MT32Pi, Sinden, etc., are there any other applications of offloading you think would be plausible, useful, or would just generally like to see?
So if that question goes to me, I would say personally I don't see any usage of that, for at least not for the things I work on, because the whole communication part is just taking so much effort. So all the things that are difficult to do, like let's say a CPU in the system, I wouldn't want to offload that. And for the things that are easier to do, I can do them in the core. I think for the MT32, it's useful because the audio can be attached to the system. You can send the commands there, and it's working just as the original one does, which is also external, if I'm right.
Yeah.
So it works there. So if let's say some thought. If you want to attach something that was also attached to the original system, like, for example, a Game Boy printer, let's say something like that.
Or do you remember the PlayStation cards that you could plug in the back and you could emulate Game Boy and NES games? You remember those?
For these things, it would be good. I think that's a good case because you don't spend all the logic in the core for an application that is attached to the original system anyway via a slow connection. So I wouldn't offload anything that was communicating internally in a console with high speed. So only for things that are connected externally. That's my opinion.
I would add to that and say I agree 100%. And then when you look at what's external, I think the MIDI solution is amazing, and I think they've done a great job with that. I need to get one still, but otherwise, I think the magic of MiSTer is that we do it on the Linux side, which really is not that taxed, and other than the input latency sort of issues, it doesn't really matter how much CPU we use. And that's where, I think of, I had to like decode the tape data for the Electron, and was trivial. And I'm trying to think what else we do on the, if we wanted to do a printer, we would do it, I would think, just on the Linux side, the printer emulation, which would be cool. We do the serial emulation and the PPP on the Linux side. So I think the obvious solution is to just use the ARM that's already there for almost everything, because of what Robert said, which is it's only good for a slow link. So what is there that's a slow link, that uses a lot of CPU? So the MIDI is one thing, but otherwise, it's hard to think of other things.
Yeah, but it's good that the possibility exists.
Now, I know the other possibility, instead of having a second SD RAM, would be to put GPIO to a Raspberry Pi and try to do some of the, like there are those Amiga hacks where you replace the processor of the Amiga with the Raspberry Pi. And then there are a lot of SCSI emulators now that work off of either Raspberry Pi or Arduino. But again, we can probably just do the SCSI emulation in a little bit of logic and the FPGA or with the Linux side. So I don't know how useful it is.
Now, regarding the testing and reporting, Robert, you have a huge menu for debug in the core right now. And also you have posted the specifics for people to test that way. But what would be useful for people that are willing to help on testing, reporting stuff? What do you need?
Well, it really depends on the situation. So currently, for example, I'm working on a new feature. So the bug reports that come in, I can only note them down. I cannot work on the bugs and on the new features at the same time. But what's really helpful is when I'm working on a bug, is to have the communication with someone who finds the bug. So ask questions again, and if they can, they usually have a better way to reproduce these things than I have. So even if I get, for example, a save state where it happens, maybe it already the problem is already there, and I cannot see the reason why it happened. And it's good to have the communication, and that's why it's great that we have the test channel now. So we had a lot of success with that, implementing the CD commands and fixing the bugs already, and it worked really well, much better than the GitHub reports we had with I had with previous code, where someone dumps a screenshot and a description, and I have to find out how does it work now, or I ask a question and next day I get a response. And in this channel it works really well, and usually it's very short communication about someone finds it and I ask some question and it gets get a response from them, and I think that works best. And it's really hard to say report in this or that way and it will help. It really depends on the case.
Yeah, and speaking about this same topic, Alan, so maybe the best way to collaborate in the documentation for the PDF that we're talking about and the cheat sheets and everything is via Discord as well?
I'm happy if anyone wants to do it. I've posted the test build up there. Maybe I don't have my own channel, but I don't think people are as excited about the PDFs as the PlayStation. So,
but they should be.
No, I don't think so. I think PlayStation's exciting. I got to get my. Unfortunately, I'm rehabbing my knee after an injury, but I've got to get my dance pads out and hooked up. So I'm ready. I should probably hook them up and make sure it works.
Yeah, DDRs, and you need the snack connectors for that.
No, I don't think so. I've got a USB like downstairs already, USB adapter. So we'll see if that works. It should work, especially because MiSTer should be able to remap it. So it should be easier than last time I tried to use it.
Yeah, that's true. But speaking about the excitement about PDF, I believe that there's obviously two groups for which it's different, exciting. For the enthusiast that wants to help grow the project, the PDF is really exciting. I understand that for the general user that just wants to play games, the PlayStation is more exciting, but it doesn't make it less important or for a different public. PlayStation, of course, will be very, very interesting because a lot of people we grew up with PlayStation. Speaking of that, which games on PlayStation did you play back in the day, Alan?
I did not have a PS1 until after I had a PS2. I got a PS1 on vacation that was modified to run Japanese games so I could play DDR. So I think PlayStation 1 and 2, I almost exclusively played DDR, and then PlayStation 2, I played a little bit of SSX Tricky and GTA would be my favorites.
Nice. You Robert?
So I also didn't have a PlayStation at that time. So I had a Nintendo 64, and sometimes a friend of mine had a PlayStation rented from someone else, and he also didn't have one. And we played some Final Fantasy VIII, and that's the only game I can remember from 20 years ago that I have seen. I played some other games in Emulator over the years, but I never really played that much on the system before.
That's interesting. Anything that you found that's interesting for you?
So I already have a large list of games I want to try. So every time I see something interesting, I note it down. So when the core is ready, I will take a look and see which games I want to play.
Nice. And you were saying, Alan? I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, I don't think so. I play DDR and I mostly PlayStation 2 stuff. So SSX and GTA, and I like racing games. So a bunch of the racing games and Need for Speed, the Sony racing games.
I did play a bunch of PlayStation games back in the day. I'm sure that you'll love playing Jammer Lammy, Robert, and also Parappa. After work that they'll take you. I don't know if Parappa has the same issues as Jammer Lammy. Probably not, from what I heard.
They have the same issue. So
the same issue. Okay.
If you do bad in the game, it will hang. So you must be good currently.
Okay, I'm really bad. I love it, but I'm really bad, so it'll hang on me. But there's a lot of stuff that I love in this console. I even worked in a translation for a game here in the Polysnots. I have to test that still. The first games I tried on your core were Ghost in the Shell and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Those are the first two I immediately tried. But I have a queue of several things like R4. I love the Die Hard trilogy game on the PlayStation. A lot of RPGs like Alundra, Breath of Fire, Metal Gear Solid. I'm a big Kojima fan from 20 years ago. I recall playing Final Fantasy the demo with a lot of people, so there's a bunch of memories here. Silent Hill. I want to play Silent Hill here and check out how it works after all these years.
I think for most of them, you still need to wait some time before they're running fine.
Yeah, I did. The two that I did run most of the time. I mean, when I first installed it, ran pretty well, so I had no issues with them. I had luck, and on my excitement, the first ones I selected were run fine, no issues.
That's great.
Yeah. So I was really, wow, this runs everything I threw at it, and maybe I was lucky, but it was awesome for me at least.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
Maybe I'm a bit biased because I look in the test channel every day and I see reports of games not working. Maybe
because you never get the reports of all the ones that work.
Yeah, that's true. That bias is true every single time.
Because I as well tried like 4 or 5 games, and at first the first few versions, I wouldn't say nothing worked. They didn't get very far, but I feel like the last time I installed it, I think every game I went and played, maybe I wasn't good enough to crash, but I don't know.
Also, it's I have my MiSTer here in my development environment. I haven't taken it down to my playground for a while. And that also affects the way that you play, right?
Yeah.
It's quite different. And we were talking about how do you decide the order to work on features, Robert?
So I usually decide depending on what's needed next by some game or some functionality. For example, the BIOS in the PlayStation needs pretty much everything the console can offer. So I had the first games running fine, even before being able to show the BIOS. So that was it's crazy how much effort they put into, and that was mainly the reason I choose all these things. So I get to a certain point in the BIOS and see, okay, now I need the geometry unit, or of course the CPU and the rendering is needed first. Otherwise, I cannot see anything. But the features I use them as they come up. So if the CPU accesses the DMA and it's not there, I go for that. I usually don't design every component to the end when I start with that. So for example, with the GPU, I only designed the part that can write pixels directly from the CPU, because that's what most of the test ROMs are doing. They write, they use the VRAM just as a frame buffer and write there from the CPU, and don't really use the GPU at all. So you just need to pass the data through. And that was the part of the GPU for quite some time. So even the PS NIC demo, I'm not sure if you have seen that. It was the first 3D you could see on the core, where is a demo where you go through some tubes and some installation, and even that is only some pixel pushing from the CPU, and it doesn't need that much of the GPU yet. So whenever something new comes up and I need it now, I try to do that. And I don't do whole modules in themselves and verify them and later plug all these modules together, because my experience is that this doesn't work in the end.
It leads to more frustration.
I have so many problems plugging these components together, and I need to work on small parts before. So plugging a part of two components together, and if that works, I can build around that and let it grow, but not having all these components and set them together. And now it must run, and of course it will not run, because the integration of all that is like 50% of the work, and it doesn't work so easily.
I think that's unfortunately what happened to Lexar too. Is he really was against trying to get any build sort of end to end working on the MiSTer or his development platform until really late. And I think that just, if nothing else, like I think it's a psychological problem. You don't see anything working.
Yeah, that's downputting when that happens. It's really frustrating. And in any kind of project, right? And I mean, it could be like exercising or whatever. You need to have some results to keep you going.
Yeah, even being able to do something small, like when I was able to load a save state from my emulator in the core and could run around in Spyro in the first world on the core. It was so amazing to see that. It just gives so much motivation to work on this project if you have something like this running.
And what did you do immediately? Did you show it to somebody else?
Yeah, I created a video and posted on Twitter. That's what.
Of course. That must have felt so good. I remember that time.
Yeah, it's great. I can show it to someone. So I can show it to my daughter, and she's halfway interested, but.
Yeah, it's not the same, because this is a specialized community, right? You show it in social media, and then the specialized community is the one that reacts.
Yeah.
That's great. And there was this question that it's been running in the chat for a few minutes. It's that he has previously seen mostly negative reception to the main MiSTer user interface and user experience. Redesigns or changes? Why do you think this is? I'm personally, I love it being lean and easy. I love it the way that it is. I don't want clutter, but I understand that to many it's not clutter. How do you feel?
So I really like the interface how it is, and it's really easy to navigate there. So if I use, for example, I use some emulator on a PC. I always have to switch from the controller to the mouse and click here and there, and it doesn't work that nice. So I even kind of copied the interface for my emulator. So something like loading a ROM works exactly the same as in the MiSTer, because I really like that kind of interface.
What do you think, Alan?
So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think there's sort of 3 levels of improvement. I think the first level is, and I should disclaim that even though I feel like I never use it, I do have a master's in human-computer interaction. I can't even say it, HCI. So I definitely think about UIs, although I tend not to really, I didn't really do that for my career so much. I think the first level is not everyone, there's a group of people, I should say, that, and I think most of us agree on this, that don't want a flashy UI or some more complicated UI. And then that's, I would say, doubly complicated by the fact of, do we want it to work on 15 kilohertz video, so very, very, very low resolution? Or is it just HDMI, or is there something in between? But then we end up in this sort of like Raspberry Pi MAME front end hyperspin sort of thing, which I don't think we have the horsepower for it. I don't think anyone wants to spend the time or energy or horsepower on that. And I think a lot of us have spent years setting up a hyperspin, just like getting the images right, and it's just kind of messing around to mess around. So I think there's sort of that set of UI, which I think most people aren't interested in. I think there's a way to do that doesn't kill MiSTer, which is like make it optional and maybe a core itself. But we won't talk too much about that. I think the other side that I'm interested in and keeping interested in is kind of twofold. One, from a software engineering perspective, the core works, it doesn't crash, it doesn't seem to leak memory, so we shouldn't really monkey with it, but it's very hard to add menu options. So I think it could be somewhat rewritten, but not look any different, and it might make it easier for us to add menus. And there are a couple of UI elements that would be nice, like maybe text entry or a spinner, because it would be nice to be able to do Wi-Fi natively and some of these other things. Maybe it's not important. And then there's other UX stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with pixels, which is like the joystick setup, which is now much better because someone added the whole thing that looks like a gamepad, which is unbelievably much better. But no one, including developers who know well, including me yesterday, can set up the analog joystick. Like, I was testing a core and it didn't work, and the analog joystick wasn't set up right, and I had screwed it up. So it's just broken. I've argued with Alexi about this a bunch, and he doesn't think it's broken. So we'd have to replace it with something that's amazing and just do it, and then hopefully he'll begrudgingly accept it. But there's a lot of little things. I think Sentient wants like a back button in a couple places, and a few people want it like when you mount an image. It would be nice if maybe the text changed and said the name of the image that's mounted, instead of like having to click on it again and then then it pops up to where it was. Does that make sense? So there's just a little things that I think would be much nicer. So we need to think about that.
Yeah, it's a hard balance problem, and different levels, as you mentioned.
And the PDF is part of that, because I went around in circles and I actually implemented help in the OSD as text, and it was really quite miserable. And I actually started to rewrite the entire user interface as just an idea. Well, I did a whole web interface and a built-in web browser built into MiSTer, and that's a fork on my GitHub somewhere at one point. And then I kind of agreed with Alexi that I couldn't really come up with a use for it. Like, what did we need the web server built into the MiSTer binary for? Like, what did we really need it for? Barely, right?
What would it allow to do that you couldn't do right now?
Yeah, I don't think anything. At the time, it was like to have a graphical installer before we had all the nice install scripts, and it also gave us like a REST API, so you could launch a core, add a game, get a screenshot. you could remote test stuff on MiSTer because you could be at work and test it at home potentially. So it had a couple nice things like that. You could control the OSD and all the keys and stuff through the gamepad, the HTML gamepad. But not useful, right? I also went down this long frame buffer rabbit hole of finding a bunch of different drawing libraries for embedded devices and Raspberry Pis to draw on the screen. And I started to implement a UI, and then you run into this issue. Well, it's only going to work on frame buffer, so then it only works on HDMI. And then, as Robert just said, but then you need a mouse, or you need anyway. It just got so ugly and complicated that it just was bad.
So much work, so much work. But sometimes you can only figure out the stuff after implementing it, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I do think, if we look at what Jimmy did with the input tester, I think it's pretty amazing. And so I think there is a balance where we can have a UI that's more like that. And
Nice. Okay, we are getting to a close for the allotted time. Of course, we can stay longer if you want to, but for those that have reached this moment, and for the stuff that we've covered, that I know that we just scratched the surface of your work, both and on what has been done this year. I'd like to thank you for your work personally, and for the time that you've spent talking about your work with us.
Yeah, thank you very much for hosting us here.
No, not at all. I love. I hope that I wasn't as dull as I imagined myself being this time, because I don't cover the subjects as widely as you do. But thank you for your time. It's been amazing. There's a lot of stuff that we can cover regarding your work right now, Alan, Robert, and this community. Everyone is. It's been amazing. Thank you very much. Trainix, Sentient 6, thank you for these events, and everybody that's been in the chat. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.